I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. I think most of us will have people that they can look back on throughout their career who have played an important role in their development. Sometimes it's about opening up new opportunities. Maybe it's that they have acted as a mentor or a coach. Or maybe they have just been an inspiration for moving down a particular path. On today's show, I'm joined by such a person, someone that provided me with an opportunity to take a new direction in my career many years ago. One which I can attach a direct correlation to me getting involved in transformation for the first time. It is one of those sliding door moments, and I have often thought about how things would have been different if I hadn't taken the opportunity presented to me at the time. Today, I'm joined by Mike Jeacock, someone who I've known for over 30 years. We worked together in Royal Bank of Scotland, and after getting heavily involved in a significant transformation, our career paths have progressed in different directions, but have often crossed over the years. Mike's approach has been absolutely consistent throughout the years that I've known him, and he is very people-focused. He will explain more about what that means, I'm sure, in the podcast. Also, make sure that you have a pen and paper available to note down the many anecdotes that Mike will surely share. There are definitely some golden nuggets in there. Hi, Mike. Thanks for agreeing to join us today. It must have been sort of 30 years that we've known each other now, and God knows where all those have gone. And I should tell everybody, this is likely to be a long episode, as Mike has a reputation for talking. But since working
together... An unfair reputation.
There you go, starting already. Since working together at RBS, I'm sure we'll explore that experience a little bit more later. You've obviously been involved in major transformations across a multitude of organisations. Do you want to give a brief introduction to you and your career today?
Sure. Well, I think as Tony said, we started off in the Royal Bank. I started off as a banker, really, and took my banking exams, and then through working mainly in HR and understanding the people issues, got dragged off up to Edinburgh with 3 others to do Project Columbus, which was the flagship of the RBS, working closely with all the executives, including the chairman and the managing director, which was aimed at changing the Royal Bank of Scotland into a modern banking system. And it worked very well, and I really enjoyed my time there. So it kind of stimulated my interest in change, and started early, although I didn't recognise it, the importance of culture in an organisation, people, not sidelining things like IT, which are great enablers, but and I've taken that around with me. So then, for my sins, I went and ran legal aid, or the operational side of legal aid. Nothing quite prepared me for the public sector, so that was a kind of an interesting. And I remember sitting there after 4 weeks thinking, what have I done? Because getting decisions was difficult, but there was a major push on then in terms of access to justice. So operationally, they were heavy in terms of their 11 centres. We got them down to 5, consistency of process. But started to talk about the people and the skill sets that were required. Then went off to, for my sins, run the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which was an interesting clash of cultures with the legal sector. Thoroughly enjoyed my time there, culminating in moving them to one centre in Birmingham. And then decided to move on and do something differently. Went to work at Ofqual for 10 months, which was exciting stuff. I mean, it was really interesting stuff. I haven't got an education background other than my dad was a headmaster and my brother was a teacher, so I had plenty of input from that area. And actually, I was going to stay there, but I started off a process with Jersey Financial Services Commission, which was coming out of the financial meltdown in 2008. So in 2014, I signed up to run their chief operating officer, first time they'd ever appointed somebody at that role, and to deliver their transformation program. So I did that, just finished doing 6 years there. So that was really kind of taught me lots and kind of put into practice all the things I think I'd accumulated over those years.
Yeah, and obviously been involved in just as you just described there, some heavy hitting transformations. So how would you define transformation? Because everyone has a different view of what transformation means. What's your definition of it?
I think it's the culture is the critical thing. and you go to organisation and they proudly tell you they've got a transformation program. What they've got is the nuts and bolts of a transformation. They're not actually doing it. And it still concerns me, certainly in recent months when you've seen the impact of COVID, that the transformation program, when people say it could have taken 5 years to do, all of a sudden it's like a double six, IT's delivering stuff, remote working. So it's that culture. And it still concerns me that too many of the leaders, the executives, the chief execs, the operational teams are kind of not enablers. A leadership, you need to be an enabler. You have to create the environment for people to flourish, knock down those barriers, rather than the, it's my way or the highway kind of mentality that I saw it, and you saw in the 90s, and I've still seen it today. It cripples an organisation. Any transformation program that's based on that style, in my opinion, has little or no chance of succeeding. And when you walk into organisation, I kind of have a mental checklist now of transformation. So, what are you losing staff? Are you losing the wrong sort of staff? Is your reward for being good in that organisation? Is you get more to do? Guess what? They leave. Is performance management about not just what you do, but how you do it? Talent programs, you haven't got a tick in the box that says talent program. We've got one, rather than actually doing something with it, giving people the opportunity. Do most of the major roles carry trainee roles where you're developing your own, which kind of does that? And I suppose the critical thing for me is when you talk about transformation, if you're not doing that across the organisation, so your support services like HR, communications, IT, support services, if they're not fully involved in that process, it doesn't work. Particularly in the HR thing, which, if your intent, as we set off in Jersey, to create as an employer of choice, they needed to be owning the performance management. They needed to be owning well-being. They needed to understand the recruitment of staff and the training programs, so that you could attract and retain the very best people. My philosophy, because we've shared it before, is two things. One, people don't care how much I know until they know how much I care. So you have to care about the organisation, and you actually have to work hard to retain your people. It's not, if I use an example, the last two regulators I've worked with, people used to say, listen, you can't do without me, I've got 10 years experience. The reality was they had 1 year's experience they've used for the last 10 years. And actually that was what it is. And they were holding on to that. And that creates silos. It's a much vaunted phrase, silos in organisations. The responsibility for breaking that down isn't just with the executive, it's with the people. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's interesting as well, isn't it? You've made a very focused sort of point there around it's the people that drive the transformation. It's the people that will deliver the transformation. But all too often, organisations start with technology or digital or something else, and not the people. And going back to sort of the RBS days, which, as you say, has been written up as the way to drive transformation, the model. But that was 30 years ago. Now, wasn't it? Or 25, 30 years ago. So what differences have you seen in those in those sort of 25, 30 years since we did that transformation?
I've seen some differences, but you probably won't be surprised. I've seen some similarities. You see, for me, IT is a fantastic enabler. But if I use the example, and the last two roles I've been, when there were people who were doing the IT, they thought that was going to be the panacea. That was going to. So invariably, when they were working their way through it, they took out the box solutions and then boutiqued them. Now, why would you do that? Why would you think that's a good idea? And the reality is that you don't invest your best people in setting the business requirements. So staff within the business, you typically got the sick and wounded to do the testing, people returning to work, instead of the key people. So it's that massive investment in front who see the process through. And that helps people in terms of making staff feel as if change isn't being done to them, that actually they're part of the solution, and actually getting them involved and embracing that, so that when you do launch a system, they can say that we were part of that. They don't switch it on and it's 3 different colours. It's not doing what it is. And far too often, and it's quite interesting, I go into an organisation and you speak to staff and they say, "Oh, the IT doesn't work about," but don't worry, we've got a workaround. Now, workaround is a sin to me, because it says there's something wrong with the process, but it's like a badge that they were collecting. We've sorted it, but actually in doing so, we've created 3 different processes that actually impact on the customer. So you have to win people's hearts and minds. You have to get them thinking about right first time. And far too often, that's not the case. IT is a great thing, but it's a great thing if it's done properly. And ownership, and I mean across all levels. And you've got to avoid at all cost pet projects. Pet projects crucify organisations.
Yeah. And I think in my experience, the technology, as you're right, technology can be a massive differential. A differentiator, should I say, within an organisation. But if people don't use it, then you're never going to get the value and the benefit. And if you don't take people on that journey and get them involved in, as you say, defining what the processes should be and testing it and making sure it's fit for purpose, then people won't click on that icon and you won't get the benefit.
Well, they don't own it. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I'd ask anybody that sit and listening to this, just ask yourself, how many pieces of staff are saying, well, it doesn't work, so I've done this. And then the other classic, which I'm sure people will nod at, is they force all processes into new systems. They simply lift and drop because that's what they know. And you have to deal with the human element in that. People feel threatened by new processes. If they've got a sphere of influence or they're an expert, then they feel threatened by this. And far too often in organizations, certainly my experience, we've promoted people with fantastic technical knowledge into people roles. Now, often the two things don't fit. As part of that culture, you have to be accepting that there is a need for subject matter experts. You don't necessarily have to make them into leaders because they struggle with that. But they do it because that's where the rewards have been placed in terms of managers' jobs. And actually, they feel inherently uncomfortable. And then you start to get attrition from your staff members who aren't getting the support. And far too often, executives talk about being coaches and mentors. They're not. They expect others to do it. So things like joining in terms of performance management, if there's a company-wide initiative, I used to go and do the performance management training with the staff because it was evidence that, it wasn't getting done to them, that actually I was there to learn. And don't underestimate the impact that those sort of things have.
Interesting. So in terms of the people side, as you say, you've got to take people on the journey, but some people just don't want to go. What experience have you had of either turning those people around or leaving them at the stop and getting on your way?
Mixed, to be honest. It's a challenge. My philosophy is change the people or change the people. You know that because that's kind of a phrase that's kind of been associated with me. I work tirelessly to change the people, but you do get to a stage where you're saying this isn't for you. And as long as you're trying to maintain their integrity and dignity and say, it's an opportunity for you, will help facilitate that rather than it being draconian, then I think you're discharging your responsibilities. You have to get people to be owning it, but you cannot continue to invest and drain the resources. If people have that kind of stubbornness or whatever it is, then you have to deal with it because organizations spent 10 years trying to be more efficient. I've spent the last 10 years trying to make them more effective. Now, there is a combination between the two. Effective people do the things that you want them to do. And far too often, and HR, going back to the HR thing, people recruit can-do people because that was the phrase. I try and find the will-do people because it's the will-do people who will change the organization, they'll embrace it, they'll challenge themselves, they'll challenge others. And if you've got a core of will-do people, that's what makes an organization from the bottom up to the top actually start to perform effectively. And seek them out. You could have switched them off because they don't feel wanted, they don't feel as if they're appreciated. Go find them. Spend 10, 15 minutes every day, as I do, saying thank you to people. It's a short amount of your time. So thank you from anybody, but if it comes from on high, it seems to have more sense of they're being recognised. Everybody can do 10, 15 minutes a day, and you can create a culture where actually they are feeling appreciated. That might seem like a real hackneyed thing, but actually it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone likes to be the pat on the back, don't they? And
everybody, I do.
Acknowledgement.
Yeah, I do. I like it when my chairman says to me, "Thanks, Mike." I'm quite happy to say that. I appreciate it because actually it is a validation.
Yeah.
But people get staff surveys. Staff surveys are fantastic, but they sit on people's shelves, and then they wonder why next time they do it, people are reluctant to fill it in. Well, they're reluctant to fill in because they've done it once before and nothing happened.
Yeah, exactly.
What a fantastic, rich source of information that is.
Yeah, or what tends to happen is the first time you get a reasonable level of response, the second time you get a very negative level of response, because people have realised that you've done nothing from the first one. Yeah. So it's almost like it's an opportunity just to.
Well, I'm sure Jersey wouldn't mind saying our first survey, which we did in 2015, we got 41% of the staff doing it. The second one in 2017, we got 60%. The last one, which we did in 18-19, we got 99% of the staff doing it. And as you said, that's because we owned it. We picked 6 topics. We asked the staff, here's 10 topics that you've thrown up. We can only afford to do 6. Which of the 6 you'd like us to do? And do you want to be part of a staff forum that actually is part of the solution? And, you can pass the ownership. You can't throw it away, but you can pass the ownership down. And they then took responsibility with some relish, I have to say, in most cases, because actually it impacted on them. And actually, that's where you get your credit for your staff. But staff surveys, people tick the box, we've done it. Our board at Jersey were fantastic in that. They really supported it. We presented to the board or the people who were involved from lower levels in terms of grading wise in the organisation. They presented to the board about what they were going to do. So it galvanizes that interest. You kind of make that connection between boards and the staff, which is really important.
Going back to your time at the Solicitors Regulation Authority and legal aid and the public sector aspects that you've done, lots of people sort of say public sector is a challenge generally because people don't like change. The people I've spoken to a lot of the time, it's not necessarily that the people don't like change. It's the bureaucracy of the organisation makes it very difficult to quickly drive transformation and change. Is that what you found?
I did, but it's often offered up as an excuse not to do things. So, if there's a will, people will support that. You've seen the changes, 10, 15 years ago, inland revenue were getting slaughtered. But now the processes are great. That's what, because people have embraced it and actually they've started to put some leadership in. I did get the sense that it was more about my way or the highway kind of stuff in the public sector. I have to be honest, it was more like that. But as they kind of released that and have brought more leadership skills in and more coaching, then you did see relaxation. Some of the best staff, and I mean the best staff in transformation I've worked in the public sector, because they have a passion. They have a passion for the subject. When you got people talking about access to justice in legal aid, you didn't have to speak to 20 minutes because it was a real passion and often driven by personal circumstances and stuff like that. And I kind of value that because you can tap into that and knock down the barriers for them. They'll take some of this much further as far as commercial organisations.
Yeah, you'll take passion every day, don't you?
I'll take passion every day. You can use that, and you can train technical knowledge, and you can. But can you train some of the softer skills? I'm always amazed they're called soft skills. I've never found these skills particularly soft or easy to do. And if you find them, then you should cherish them and develop people. And as an organisation, my job is to step away and let people fulfil their potential. The greatest gift somebody can give to me is that they're fulfilling their potential. And if they leave, they're on loan to me. They're not my staff. How they've got them, I'll try and develop.
So how do you go about doing that?
You've got to be authentic, Tony. You've got to care. I go back to what I said before. People don't care how much I know until they know how much I care. If somebody's having a tough time at home, make the time to speak to them. Make sure you understand them. Be visible. The visible leadership is much vaunted. I always smile at the story that back in our days in the bank when they did their first staff survey, my manager, who was the most remote manager I've ever worked with, got told he had to be more visible. And sure enough, every Tuesday afternoon at 2:00, his diary card came out. He walked around the office, never said anything to anybody. But went round and said, "Look, I'm visible." Never said a word to anybody. Went straight back in with that. In fact, he got to the stage where we knew it was either somewhere between 2 and 3 on a Tuesday when we saw him. So we could set your watches back. But it's that interpretation. People kind of, and it's not an intrusion. It's emotional intelligence. You and I will know when somebody's upset. I will know when somebody's upset. It's what I do about it. Do I ignore it?
Yeah.
And, you know, you hear in businesses, oh, that's just Mary or that's just Billy, that's their way. You have to help them change that that's the perception, because it actually becomes them if you're not careful, and actually they live it.
Absolutely.
So you've got to care.
Yeah, I think, as you say, so many people have said, have sort of responded to, you've got to take down the barriers by moving out of offices and going into open plan offices and stuff like that. But actually, then they just surround themselves with boxes, don't they, to hide themselves.
They create their own silo.
Yeah,
listen,
exactly.
You're talking to a man that last year was dressed in a Scooby-Doo onesie on behalf of the staff raising money for the RSPCA in Jersey. Now, you know, you've got, I mean, it sounds really trite, but you've got to kind of do some of those things that kind of do. I enjoy doing those things. You know, I'm a bit kind of out there on stuff like that. But that's what wins you the authenticity with staff, and actually you're on side.
But that's just taking your weekend costumes into work, isn't it, Mike? So
yeah, we're not going into that territory. But you've got to be seen to be part of that, and you're not always the solution. But you know, we raised £8,000 on the back of that, by far the biggest on Jersey, and we won the award for top dog. You know, it got us good profile. But actually, it's important in attracting people to the organisation. Yeah. I'm sure they won't mind saying in Jersey, we were getting people joining the organisation who were coming to retire for better work-life balance. They have a very difficult job to do. So it was really important to get across that actually we needed people who were, you know, very capable of working at time pressures and pressure as well. So it started to change the perception of the organisation and doing things like corporate social responsibility. I gave everybody, or the commission gave everybody 14 hours a year that they could use for corporate social responsibility. Now that starts to change the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you say, or what would you say are the vital steps in any sort of transformation framework? What are the must-haves as far as you're concerned?
Have a blueprint. I mean, a proper blueprint that touches every bit of the business. I mean, you see some of these beautifully crafted transformation policy documents, which, you know, are beautiful, but actually, can you translate that into operational stuff? Yeah. So take every bit of the business, understand what that blueprint and transformation means for them. Build that.
What does that look like, though, for you in terms of the ones that you've driven through? All had experience of, as you say, these 50-page, 100-page, beautifully presented that no one reads, and they just collect dust on the on the shelf.
They are beautiful, though.
Yeah. What does a blueprint? What does your blueprint look like?
It talks about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, timescales, proper governance around it. Too many people underestimate the importance of things like program management offices. You know, good governance. You know, set outcomes, don't set objectives. Set outcomes for organisation. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted because I know that you feel bad. It's about outcomes. It's you know, you can give people objectives and you can tick the box. If you give them 100 to do, they'll probably get to 100 and stop, where they've probably got the capacity to go on and do more. But talk about outcomes, recognise that as your reward system. So you do get rewarded for what you do, but how you do it is the differentiator. You're also 50% of your reward is doing that. That changes people's mindsets because people like to be rewarded financially. There's nothing wrong with that. But as long as you're not getting rewarded for something you did 10 years ago, still, you know, you've got to kind of move it on. And that helps change the whole approach. But you've got to think about what it's going to look like. I'm talking small times. You know, I'm still hearing people saying in 5 years' time, you know, we could have had 3 pandemics in 5. You can say, I find it difficult to kind of get too excited about 5 years. I'm stretching it at 3 because even then, you know, the impact that's, you've seen the changes in IT systems in the last 3 years, you know, it's game-changing stuff. And the generation that's coming through into the recruitment markets have got different expectations. They're not lifers. They're not going to join an organisation for life. No. They're going to change.
Yeah, and they want that, don't they? They're looking for that change. They're looking for that.
I find them excited. I find this generation really exciting. You know, they want to be recruited off LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. They don't want to see an advert in your local newspaper. They won't buy a local newspaper, never mind go looking for a job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, people sort of call them the sort of butterfly minds and stuff, and almost use that as a derogatory term. But actually, it's a strength in many cases because they're constantly looking for that innovation, aren't they? Looking for something new.
But, you know, as a reverse of the visible leadership, if I want my cup filling up and, you know, I need motivating, it's that group I'll invariably go to. because, you know, they give you a different perspective. They've got an enthusiasm. They're not thinking in silos. They may even think of in 18 months, I'm going off traveling around the world. You know, I don't remember at that age me thinking that was an option, but that's quite exciting to them. And you know what? They work very hard. And the other group that who kind of I get motivation from is those people who've gone off to start families, be obviously husbands and wives, and yet organisations have invested massive amounts of training, and then they discard them as if, you know, well, they can't come back and do a full-time job. It's the best kept secret in Jersey that the staff there that we've recruited lots of expertise from other organisations, and you actually embrace them, and you make you give them the IT. You know, this new ways of working from home. Flexible working was around when me and you were starting in the bank.
Yeah.
But good organisations have sort of said, well, that's just the way, that's how we're going to be. Now it's a scurrying to see how they can do flexible working. And as long as people, you know, are aware that there's a limit to it if necessary, and that you have to come into the office 1, 2 days, I don't know, whatever those are. But the one mistake organisation I know are making, because I've spoken to people recently, they're just expecting managers who have never remote managed to have those skills. It's a completely different set of skills. I did it for 2 years, and it was hard. It was the hardest thing, because you need great information, and you need a slightly different mindset. Not slightly, you need a different mindset.
But it goes back to what we just talked about earlier, isn't it? It's the challenge of remote working is you can't just walk around the office and ask how people are, not even ask how people are, see how people are, and then just interact with them. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, in sort of the 100% remote working that a lot of people have been doing now.
Yeah, and I think people are ducking the issue. I'm being honest. You know, I spent from the early 90s right to now trying to understand emotional intelligence. I'm further on in that journey. Do I understand it? No. But I do kind of understand that you have to respond to things that, you know, if people are reaching out to you in different ways, they're asking you to actually, you know, talk to them or stuff, you'll know. And if you've got data where they were doing 10 things one week and all of a sudden they're doing 5, something's wrong. But you can ignore that and think, well, it'll go away. Or you can kind of pick up the phone, Zoom, whatever, and kind of say, is everything okay? You know, and often there are personal circumstances. It happens. That's life.
Yeah.
But as a remote manager, you're right. It's much more difficult than doing, you know, going in the office and seeing somebody sat on the chest sobbing, you know, because guess what? There's something wrong. You haven't got that facility. But you cannot use that as an excuse for not being effective in terms of your management. And those trainings courses have long since been in organisations who have had to do it that way. And it's a mindset. That's the cultural thing. We come back to, don't we, the cultural thing.
But it is what you just said, isn't it? It's about treating people as individuals, but also checking up, not checking up on them, checking in with them, and observing what's going on. And as you say, you know, the data will probably tell you more about the reality than what you can observe. Because some people are in a really, really bad place, but when they go into the office, put on the best face.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I give you a good example. You know, when I started off in the bank, I got my first appointment. You know, I was going to change the world. I was going to make this the most effective pattern. I ended up doing the work myself. So I was there till 8 o'clock every night. Everybody else was going on at 5 o'clock because I thought it would make me look good. And one day, a manager who was forward thinking brought me a house brick, and he put it on my desk. And I said, "What's that for?" He said, "Well, next time you think somebody brings it on and you say you'll do it, pick it up and put it in your haversack because you're knackered, because you're carrying everybody's bricks." And I just thought, bloody hell, you know, because it was insightful, you know, and you know, it's a true story. And so staff used to say, "What's the brick on your desk for? Are you going to bring me one?" You know, because you thought that was the right thing to do because it made you look good or it made your department. So staff soon learned they didn't have to solve a problem because they could give it to Mike.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's little things like that that kind of stick with you in terms of your understanding about how you need to be. I'm going to use the word again, effective. And those are challenges.
So you're saying blueprint is one of the 3 things. What are the other 2?
I think it's an obsession with actually what are the right outcomes and sticking to it. And you need your board, not your exec board. You need your board to be effective in that. You know, board effectiveness are much vaunted. Actually, they do make a difference when they do it right. You know, skill sets, changing skill sets. I'm sure Jersey wouldn't mind. We had they had real challenges on cyber security, so they started to embroider into their board people who understood that technology, data, regulation. So they started to build a better effectiveness.
Yeah.
If you look at a board's agenda, when we used to go and look at boards' agendas because we got invited to go and look at change, they were still talking about things that had little or no relevance to what was actually going on in the business. There's a danger in because you don't want to make them executive boards. They're not there to do that, but they are there to offer challenge, to set policy, to set what's required. The strategy.
It's the setting the parameters, isn't it?
It's setting the parameters. That's the phrase I was looking at. It is setting the parameters, and too many people ignore that.
And I think there's also a place for that executive board as well, isn't there, to ensure. I usually tell the story quite a lot about the Columbus days, and at 10 o'clock on a Thursday, we knew exactly where all the board was because they were in St Andrew's Square, and we were in the process of presenting to them what was going on with the Columbus programme and what's next. Well, we got really clear decisions. It was yes, no, or we can't make a decision, so we get X, Y, Z.
And it seems a long time ago, but they were making decisions about telephone banking.
Yeah.
Would it ever work? Was this a kind of a red herring? And think of the impact of internet banking now. It wasn't something that was kind of universally accepted as the way to go. But they had enough people with fast-sightedness to go and do it. Yeah, but you actually got a challenge. They sent me to Glasgow, an Englishman, to run the rollout of Columbus. I mean, that was a big decision in the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yeah. Well, I always say, at the end of the day, the project was about taking a predominantly Scottish-based provincial bank into one that could take over NatWest and become, what did it become, the second biggest in the world at one stage, I think, wasn't it? And without that change programme, would never be able to do that.
Yeah. And a lot of that was all stuff. McKinsey's were really good on that, who were the kind of consultants, because they kind of were growing in confidence that this cultural thing was good. I take great out like you, all the sales coordinators, the people who've gone on to bigger and better things. They're all in now major organisations. Have taken some of those principles and done with them what they wished and developed them. But they're invariably being fairly successful wherever they go. I mean, I would argue, and this is my view, is that the Royal Bank could have gone on to greater things, but it seems to lose its people focus. Its greatest strength in those early days was its people. I mean, we had fantastic people who were doing fantastic things, working in new ways, new ways of working. We didn't use those phrases, but customer advisors, customer service was taken to different levels because of the enthusiasm.
My take is that they got a little bit arrogant and thought they could take on the world, and
lost sight of outcomes. To be honest,
exactly.
that was the point. I could sense it. Things were changing, and me. That's my whole philosophy. If you start to lose sight of the people things, then an organisation quite possibly is going to get into trouble. But that's what it needed. It needed that sense of it. And in those days where we were trailblazing, of course, it was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a final question, I suppose. Driving change and transformation can be stressful for everybody, for the leaders even more so at times. What do you do to sort of manage that?
I kind of got a good close set of friends, and I mean proper friends. I've probably got hardcore of 10 or 15. These are people I've grown up with, so it's the butcher, the maker, and the candlestick maker. There's 13 of us sitting in a row at Manchester United, so that's kind of, and to them, I'm Mike Jeacock, who I grew up with, and not, that stuff. That's really important to me in terms of my authenticity as a person. I've got a very supportive family. My wife, in terms of very supportive. She's had to put with me living away from home, which you may see as a benefit most of the time. But you've just got to kind of make sure you can switch off. I love watching Coronation Street. I'm a big fan of Made in Chelsea. And I'm able to talk to staff about Coronation Street, Made in Chelsea. So I kind of have that relaxation thing. But I like going to work. I mean, I'm probably going to get slaughtered for this, but I actually like getting up in the morning and going to work. But I also have a sense of when I know it's time for me to it's time for me to try and do something else. Because having invested in all that, you've got to let people fly. You can't develop people for them to see you as the blockage to that. And, I take great delight. I still get asked to be mentors and coach to quite a lot of people who I've worked with. So just sometimes when they need a sense check. So I get excitement about that. I get excited about change. I still get excited about change.
Yeah. No, I was just about to say, actually, I think one of the things that I've noticed about you in particular, right from meeting you right at the start of the RBS journey, was the sort of self-awareness, and it's exactly what you've just been talking about there. It's having that real understanding about when it's right to do certain things, when it's right to step back, when it's right to let people fly, and that's a massive strength.
Yeah, and I think I think organisations are recognising that's. But actually, I learned that. I mean, some of it's probably intrinsic in me, but I learned some of that from as much about seeing people who I didn't respect, and I have values, and kind of I always find myself when I'm in conflict with people, it's when they're trampling on my value chain, and I've kind of learned that. So if I see it now, I kind of recognise it for what it is. It's not personal, other than it's my personal values, and I've got to the stage where I've got the confidence to be able to say to somebody, you know what, that's not what I'm about. Because transformation's hard enough, but if you're doing it where there's conflict, it's almost impossible, I would say, to do. And a recognition of that is really important. And there are times when you've got to kind of just move on and do something else, and take that to someone else, and watch, hopefully, as the organisation continue to flourish, because that's one of the checks. It doesn't always happen, I gotta say, but that's the responsibility of others.
There's no guarantee in anything that we do, is there? So there's always you've got to be pushing the boundaries, because if you're succeeding in everything, you're probably not pushing the boundaries for hard enough. You're probably taking it a bit too easy. It's equally important to ensure that you put everything in place that you can do to ensure the likelihood of success is as high. It's frightening to say, or to hear that 70% of transformation programs fail to deliver what they set out to deliver. But you'd never want to get to 100% being successful, because they're not pushing the boundaries enough if they are.
It's interesting that, when I was leading the Jersey Financial Services, the chairman said to me, the gift that I bring is I can be the conductor of the orchestra, but I'm equally as happy being part of the orchestra. I feel comfortable doing that. And I think you've got to kind of understand that that's kind of important, that, you've got to be able to take people on, but also you've got the opportunity to see people flourish. I get great satisfaction from seeing people, fly in and, as you say, being very successful. And if I've been a small part of that, then I kind of tick the box on that.
Absolutely. So I tend to finish these podcasts off with the final question being, what's the one takeaway that you can boil everything down to? But I think everyone will know by now it's the people side.
It's the people, yeah. I'm not going to disappoint you and say something different. I've spent 45 minutes telling you. If you get, people say, and I always say, things don't happen, people make things happen. And as long as you hold on to that, it's not something magic very rarely comes along. It does sometimes, but actually it's your people that will make a difference. You have to give them the opportunity, the tools to be successful. And if they fail, it's a lesson. It's in training. I'm always reminded of Branson when somebody's lost him £9 million, and the guy says, "Do you want my resignation?" He says, "I've just invested £9 million in your training, my son. You're not going anywhere." And it's little things like that kind of we should remember. Absolutely. But it is about people, and care about your people. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next for you? What I know you're just saying that
cup of tea, I think.
Cup of tea now.
Cup of tea, yeah.
Cup of tea, feet up, watching back issues at Coronation Street.
No, I watched it last night. I'm okay. I guess it's what's my next opportunity to take. There are lots of things happening in the market as it starts to reform. I'm fascinated by this constant reference to new ways of working. How about effective ways of working? That's kind of stuff. I think some organisations have got wake-up calls in terms of how they've gone about some of this stuff. That'll be fairly interesting. If you harness those opportunities, I think you're going to be very successful, because I think that's the opportunity. And keep your good people where you can. You can't always hang on to them, but now's the time to be telling them how much you're worthy of them, and don't forget to say thank you.
And on that point, thank you very much. That was really good. Thanks, Mike. And we occasionally get some questions. Are you happy if I collate them to answer some? No. They can bugger off.
Of course I am.
Brilliant. All right. Cheers, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Mike.
Mike, as ever, you don't disappoint. Many thanks for your time. The part that I really enjoy with these podcasts is that although we are talking about the same subject matter, change and transformation, everybody has a different focus or approach that they believe helps to differentiate themselves and supports their success. We have recently launched the Transformation Leaders Hub to create a community of like-minded peers, all change and transformation professionals who understand the importance of building and maintaining a strong network. Within the hub, there are many opportunities to make new connections, and as the community grows, I passionately believe that we will change the way organisations source their transformation talent. Please do check it out. We have both free and paid membership options. See the link in the show notes below. Speak soon.